What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon, and it's time for another Junkyard Dawgcast draft. We are going to do the 2025 Georgia football roster draft. Very simple. We are going to take turns drafting players on the upcoming Georgia team, just trying to build the best team among the three of us. Of course, we're going to have you guys vote on that and see what you guys decide was the best team among us. So be sure to stick around for this episode. Go subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Go to Dogs247 and subscribe. So got a 50% off deal going on there. Go check out our YouTube, Dogs247, which I'm hoping several of y'all are watching us live there. And hey, let's get the show going. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. And fellas, it is draft time. We are breaking out another draft. We are going to do the 2025 Georgia football roster draft. We're each going to pick 11 players on this 2025 Georgia roster. I will go into the breakdown of the positions we got to hit, and we will have everybody vote on these teams and see who decides who had the best team among us. Before we get this thing going, I want to throw it over to Ben. Ben, this is the first time we've gotten to see you since your LASIK surgery. Give the folks who are watching, especially those listening, an update on how things are going.
I can see. It's crazy. I got to admit, if you're thinking about getting LASIK, I recommend it. Only a few days removed from it. Still some recovery, still some tired eyes, but yeah, the vision is as good as it's ever been. So I can't complain one bit.
Now, did you plan your surgery so you would have the recovery under, you would be well into your recovery before this draft? Are you feeling more confident going into this
No,
draft?
I planned it so that I could take an official visit weekend off and I could put all of that pressure on you all last weekend. So that timing worked out perfectly for me.
All right, well, let's get into this because I imagine this will probably be a longer episode. As I mentioned, we will have 11 picks each in this draft, and there is some criteria we got to hit. First note, no quarterbacks, because I think all three of us really agreed whoever gets Gunnar Stockton is probably going to win the vote. So we're not picking a quarterback. Everyone will take one running back, two either receiver or tight end, so basically two pass catchers, two offensive linemen, two defensive linemen, an outside linebacker, an inside linebacker, and a pair of defensive backs. So 11 picks. And the way we're going to set this order, guys, I went back to our post-spring podcast, and I counted up the votes, who said who had the best of the teams between our spring breakouts. And I was the winner on that one, and that's very rare. So I get the choice of where I'm going to pick, and I'm going to pick first. I want to get the first pick. Kipp, you had the second most votes, so you get to choose. Do you want to pick second or do you want to pick third and then get the turn in the snake?
I'm going to pick second.
All right, going to make it easy with Ben rounding us out.
And I got the pick I wanted. I strategized my spring breakouts draft so that I could get the third pick here this time.
Are you telling me you tanked in a draft for the players? I mean, this guy really does have 20/20 vision. I mean, he's killing it.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right, we're gonna start this, and since I have the first overall pick, I've gone back and forth on where I want to go with this, but I think you do have to keep in mind what positions are available and the different needs at those positions. So with the first overall pick, I'm going to take running back Nate Frazier. I just feel really good about taking the top running back, knowing that is a need. There's probably 4 or 5 different players I considered with the number 1 overall pick. But the fact Nate's coming off a season where he led the team in rushing, I think the appearance and the addition of Josh McCray from Illinois is really going to help Nate and sort of have that thunder and lightning with that pick. So number 1 overall, Nate Frazier, the first running back, goes off the board. All right, Kipp, I'll throw it to you. I will say if there's a few moments of silence between all these picks, that's because I'm writing down everyone's pick and keeping up with what's going on. But I throw it to you, Kipp. You got the second pick. Where are you going?
I'm going with the player I think is going to lead Georgia in yards from scrimmage, along with a bold prediction. I'm going Zachariah Branch. I think heading into the summer, he is clearly Georgia's most talented playmaker. No offense to Nate Frazier, had an outstanding freshman season. We're going to continue to harp on ball security being what can really unlock his true skill set. But I think Zachariah Branch comes in with exactly the skill set Georgia needs to feature early, often, including special teams. But I think, every single year the question gets asked, is this going to be the year that Georgia actually has another guy get 1,000 yards? And I'm going to go ahead and just say it again. We'll just keep predicting it until it happens. But Georgia plays 14, 15 games. I think Zachariah goes out there and averages 75, 80 yards a game and gives them their second 1,000-yard receiver. I know Terrence Edwards every year, he feels like he's, the Miami Dolphins is coming through and looking and saying, oh, I'm still the only one that's ever done it. But I do think that this is the year Branch gets it done. He's just too talented for me not to take as my first player in this draft because, again, I think he leads Georgia in yards from scrimmage and is their biggest playmaker. And, again, like I said, adds on special teams as well. So just a crucial player for Georgia overall heading into the season.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Mercury Morris with the Dolphins. That's sort of where Terrence Edward is at this point. And I really like that pick. Zachariah Branch was my first pick back in the spring breakouts draft and thought about it there, decided to wait. And, of course, Kipp snaps him up. So good pick there. All right, Ben, you got the first of consecutive picks. Before you make your pick, I did want to ask, were Nate Frazier or Zachariah Branch on the top of your board, or are you feeling pretty good about how things have fallen?
No, as it turns out, I wanted the number 2 pick. I thought I was okay at 3, but as I did want Zachariah Branch. I didn't think Kipp was going to do it. So good pick, Kipp. Good pick, Jordan, as well. But Zachariah Branch was going to be my 1-3 pick, no doubt about it, if he was there. Because you both went offense, I think I'm going to change it up a little bit. I don't know who y'all are looking at on the defensive side of the ball, but I'm going to go with 2 guys that I think. Well, I'll start with my first pick. I'll start with the guy that I think will be the team leader on the defensive side of the ball this year. I don't necessarily know that he's the guy with the most NFL upside at his position. I don't necessarily know that he's even the most athletically talented guy at his position, but I think that he will be the brains of the Georgia defense this year, and that's C.J. Allen. So I'm taking C.J. Allen as my linebacker in this class. I think we've all been kind of waiting for a couple of years now. Like, all right, C.J. Allen, we've heard this name for years and years and years, and he's been a great player playing very early at Georgia. Now it's his time to really step up and be that guy at linebacker. And we know Georgia's track record of Butkus Award winners, like whoever is going to be that feature Mike linebacker type of guy is always going to be an important, critical part of Georgia's defense. And I think that C.J. Allen is that guy this year for Georgia. With my second pick, I'm also going to stick on defense. And I am going to go with, because of what Georgia lost, because of where Georgia went in the transfer portal, I think that KJ Bolden as a sophomore is as important to this Georgia football team as any player at any position on either side of the ball. I could have easily justified taking him with my first rounder as well. George, the safety position, when I was on my show a couple of weeks ago when we had Cooper Patagna on, he was talking about how important the safety position is to Georgia and how they think of the safety almost as importantly as they think of the quarterback position on the offensive side. And so I think KJ Bolden's primed to have a big year. I think that his NFL potential speaks for itself. But I think that it's no secret that Georgia wasn't totally confident about its safety position, or they wouldn't have gone out and gotten 3 in the portal. The one person in that room that they have no concerns about, no questions about what he's going to be for them this season is KJ Bolden. And so for that reason, I'm taking him with my number 2 pick.
Hard to argue with going on defense with your first two picks, especially when you have them at the turn like that. Really like both those picks. CJ Allen was one of a couple of guys I thought about with the number one overall pick. So to get him there, I think he's got a really good chance to be Georgia's leading tackler this year. And then, like, you can't go wrong with KJ Bolden. And you talk about defensive back. There's several guys that I think are primed to be really good in the secondary this year. But KJ Bolden feels like, him and Dalen Everett are probably the two guys that are the safest bets in that secondary. So I like those two picks as much as that pains me to admit, Ben. All right, Kipp, you're back up. Where are you going with your second pick?
Man, this one's tough because there's a lot of – I still have two guys in my top five left on the board. So I'm flip-flopping, trying to predict which one Jordan might take with his next pick. So I'm going to go – you know what? I'll go with my offensive pick. And I choose this because it goes back to another bold prediction I have, and that's a guy that hasn't been talked about a lot. I'm going with Roderick Robinson because I think he's healthy coming into fall camp. I think he was more important last year than Georgia realized. Not having him in the backfield was a big part of why Georgia's run game never got off the ground, pun intended. And I think he challenges Nate Frazier for the most rushing yards this season. I just think that when you're talking about someone who's been in the program long enough, knows the offense, I know they got Josh McCray out of the portal, but I think him being healthy in camp, they are going to look to him to be a big part of the offense, and he's going to be a lot more important than – maybe people have been talking about this year, because it's all about the new guys. Will Walker look good in spring? You got, just 6 scholarship running backs plus Cash Jones. It's a crowded backfield, but I just think that, Roderick Robinson being healthy may be one of the most important aspects of this offense that isn't being talked about. And I think he's got the talent to have a bounce back season. And I just think that's my second bold prediction in this draft, that he does bounce back. He is healthy. And, Nate Frazier might have more yards from scrimmage, but I think it's going to be barely. But I think that Roderick Robinson's going to be a guy they use in the red zone, use early and often, and they just enjoy having him healthy once again.
You talk about some of the issues Georgia's run game had last year. I think a lot of that can be tied to the fact that Roderick Robinson wasn't able to be out there. And then about halfway through the season, Branson Robinson wasn't able to be out there. So getting Roderick back would be huge. And I think you look at that combination. It's something I really took for granted last season. The fact that they didn't really have a power back. They didn't have that guy they could count on to lower his shoulder and break through tackles. They had some really speedy guys, and I think Nate Frazier at times was able to do that. But Roderick Robinson's a guy, if he is back healthy, I think that bodes really well for this team this year. All right, getting ready to end the second round and go into the third round. I really thought Kipp was about to snipe this next pick for me, so I'm glad that he went offense, because I'm going defense. And it's a guy I mentioned a few minutes ago. We were talking about KJ Bolden. I'm taking Dalen Everett. I think Dalen is a guy that, if you told me right now there is only one first-round pick off of this 2025 team, my money would be on Dalen Everett. And I think that he has developed himself into a lockdown corner, a guy that Georgia can count on at the corner position. And I think that he's a guy that's poised to have a really big year. I'm interested to see about a month from now, when we're at SEC Media Days, not knowing off the top of my head who would be in the competition with him among SEC corners. I think he's got a very good chance to be a preseason first-team All-SEC selection. So I like Dalen there. And then going into the third round, this is where there's one position I feel like on our list that we have to check off that gets very complicated. And I'm about to make it more complicated for Kipp and Ben, because I'm going to take Elo Madozi. I'm going to check off that outside linebacker. I think you look at the fact they went and got him. One of the biggest questions on either side of the ball for us during spring practice was outside linebacker. And I thought there was a chance that they would stand pat with Quintavious Johnson and just say, look, we're going to roll with this sophomore and kind of take, the learning curve and, when he has some tough times, but they decided, look, we're going to instead go in the portal and get a guy that, is not only impressive in what he did at Army, but, again, I call back to the Stay Wolk interview that Ben did with him. I mean, if you haven't listened to that, I highly encourage that, not only because I just drafted him, but also because I think he's going to play a big role in this defense. So I check off one of the two DBs for my team, and then I get my outside linebacker. I had Elo very high on my board because of that positional value, and I'm feeling pretty good about my team through 3 picks. All right, Kipp, I'll throw it right back to you. Where are you going with your next pick?
If I'm looking ahead to the NFL draft, and I think as far as Georgia's roster, the guy who has a chance to improve his stock the most and become a first-round pick, I got Christian Miller. I think Georgia's defensive line, again, that's the bread and butter of this defense, is the defensive line. And I look at what they have, returning. He's the guy that leads the defense as far as tackles for loss of guys coming back. And when he was on the field, he was disruptive. And it really is about, Georgia getting some luck as far as injuries are concerned, because last year, like I said, whether there's running back, offensive line, defensive line, they got hit pretty hard there. And I think Christian Miller being healthy is a big part of this defense. And I think this is overall explosiveness and what he brings to the table. Thought they, again, going to bring it back again. I thought they'd have Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins out there. Still shocked he went in the draft because he was kind of like Christian Miller. And anytime he's on, he kind of knew. He made it, he made himself known, his presence known out there. And I think that Christian Miller brings that kind of potential there to where he could have 6-7 sacks along the interior line, but have, double-digit tackles for loss and kind of be that leader on a defensive front that's really looking for an identity right now.
All right, Ben, you're next up. Hit us with your 3rd pick of this draft.
So y'all have made some decisions for me already with some of the picks that you have made. So I'm gonna try and make some things complicated for you all moving forward in this draft with my next 2 picks, just to maybe try and create an advantage in a certain spot. So with my first pick here, I'm going to take the guy that I believe is the best offensive tackle. If he was healthy all season long, I don't think that there would have been any questions about the type of player that he was. And I'm going to go with offensive tackle Monroe Freeling. I think that because of really one sack that he gave up against Notre Dame, there has been an incorrect narrative about the type of player that Monroe Freeling is. Now, he wasn't perfect last season, but it was really his first full action. And I just think that Georgia's expecting him to be that offensive tackle that they can count on for this season. And so I'm taking Monroe Freeling with that pick. And then with my second pick, I'm also going to stick on the offensive line, and I'm going to go with the guy that I think is going to hold down the other tackle position, at least to start the year, and that's Ernest Green. I'm going to lock down both tackle spots with this sort of spot in the snake draft. I think, Ernest Green, another guy that dealt with injuries last year. He even kind of had to be held out at certain points, and I think Georgia's offensive line suffered while he was playing through injury and then when they were without him at certain points. And so he's had a great offseason from everything that I've heard. I think that he felt some of the pressure from some of the young guys that are on the roster now, that I assume at least one of you will pick that guy that is going to be pushing Ernest Green probably for a starting role at right tackle, but or left tackle, just depending on how it shakes out. But I think that Ernest Green, Monroe Freeling are going to week 1 be who Georgia is looking at tackle. And so I wanted to make sure that I had both starting tackles on my team.
I got to give Ben some credit because I knew with the offensive line piece of this, like I have to imagine the folks who vote on this are going to give the nod to the offensive tackles rather than some of the interior guys. But to me, you look at this offense, aside from Gunnar Stockton, it's like Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green. How they play is probably going to say a lot about how well this offense plays. And, I'm pretty bullish on Monroe Freeling. I need to see it with Ernest Green, especially since he's playing a new position. But you have definitely made this complicated, Ben, and I think that you knew full well what you were doing in making that happen. But two offensive linemen there, and very likely Georgia's two starting offensive tackles this season. All right, I'm going to see here if there's going to be a run on these offensive linemen. Kipp, where are you going with your fourth pick?
Yeah, I'm going Drew Bobo. I'm locking that center position down. If we're talking about a guy that, I'm not going to say job security, but if we're projecting, who we feel comfortable starting on this offensive line going into the season, I don't think there's anyone with better stock right now than Drew Bobo, because he's already shown, last year how well he could play. He's not going to have to worry about switching positions, whether he's the left tackle or right tackle. And I think that his stock is, he's definitely, I'll just steal your guys' line, he's arrow pointed up, because I think he impressed when he was out there. There were more questions, I think, maybe about Jared Wilson going into last season than I really have about Drew Bobo. I think that, his knowledge of the offense, his ability to communicate, his athleticism, I think really all points to a breakout season, and a guy that I don't think is getting talked about enough as being, probably going into this year going to be one of the better offensive linemen in the SEC. And he, whenever he committed, there was a lot of, we'll just say it, there was a lot of nepotism calls out there. Is this guy really going on scholarship? Can his dad take care of him? So no one's talking about that anymore. He's a legitimate SEC player and a really damn good SEC player, and I'm glad to have him on my roster heading into the season. I think he's going to really hold it down for Kipp's draft.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think really highly of Drew Bobo, and I think, again, he's pretty much locked in as a starting center. And the fact that you look at the job he did, when Jared Wilson got hurt last year, I honestly kind of wondered if there was going to be a competition, though they turned back to Jared, and that wound up working out all right. All right, 2 consecutive picks for me, and I'm going to go back to the offense. I'm going to go with my first pass catcher. I'm going to go Colby Young. I think that Colby has an opportunity to be one of the go-to receivers in this offense with Gunnar Stockton, especially in the red zone. You look at that big-bodied receiver. The thing that I am fascinated, and we're only going to know once we get into the season, is just how much we see Colby Young compared to Noah Thomas. Noah Thomas is coming off a great season at Texas A&M, but I think that Georgia has a vision for what Colby Young's going to mean to this offense in 2025. They stuck with him and counted on trying to get him back after his legal situation resolved itself. And I think Colby Young's got a chance to have a really productive 2025 and play a big role in this offense. I'm going to start the fifth round rather, and finish off this little run of offensive linemen. And I'm going to get the guy that I actually said is, when I went and made my board for this draft, I had him as my top offensive lineman. It's Micah Morris. I think having his experience back at that guard spot, if they don't have Micah coming off of losing Tate Ratledge and also losing Dylan Fairchild, I think Georgia's in a really tough spot. Georgia may even go into the portal looking to land a starting interior offensive lineman, but Micah has been through the fire, been there, done that, a proven offensive lineman, and a guy that's going to be counted on in the interior, because you talk about him probably starting at left guard, Drew Bobo, a first-time starter at center, at least a first full-time starter at center, and then probably Daniel Calhoun, who's just coming off of his freshman year at Georgia. So I think a lot of folks are going to be counting on Micah Morris to make plays and be dependable up front, and I think he's capable of doing just that. All right, Kipp, back to you with your next pick.
I'm going to go ahead and lock down my defensive front and take a guy that I think is going to push for the team lead in sacks, just because he's going to be used all over the place. That's Gabe Harris. I think, technically you could say he's going to have a lot of snaps at outside linebacker, because I think they're going to use him in a lot of fronts, but I like him, at defensive end, and I think he's a guy that, just like Christian Miller, comes in with, the pedigree of when he's on the field, He's making plays. I mean, he was a guy that, like, early on, I'm like, all right, this might be the next big defensive front guy for Georgia, and I still think he's going to be that guy, and they're going to need him to be that guy. So I think as far as his ability to stop the run and rush the passer, he just brings a lot to the table. I really like his upside. I don't really think we've seen the best of Gabe Harris. Obviously, him missing the spring probably taps into that and allows me to kind of buy low, I guess, because I think he would have been taken a couple rounds earlier had we seen him in the spring. But I think all the different lineups Georgia's going to run out, he's going to be rolled out all across the defensive front. He's just a huge piece of their defensive puzzle going into the fall.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. And like you said, he's sort of one of those unknowns because we didn't see him in the spring, but I do think he is poised to be very productive and play a really important role on this defensive line. All right, Ben, you've got back-to-back picks, but I want you to just make one of them, and then I'm going to throw us to a break, kind of a halftime of our draft. But where are you going with your next pick?
I'm torn on what to do here. I'll be honest, Jordan. I didn't think you were going to take Colby Young as early as you did. I thought I was going to be able to get him later, and he was definitely someone that I wanted on my team. You could see Georgia's offense change last year when he was gone. But I think I want to secure my wide receiver tight end position here coming up. So I am going to go with the other transfer. You guys have both taken transfers at wide receiver already, and I'll take the other transfer at wide receiver, who I think is also going to be a feature part of this offense. And, I agree with Kipp. I do think Zachariah Branch is going to be the leading yards from scrimmage guy on Georgia's offense. But I think it's interesting. We don't really know what him and Colby Young and Noah Thomas, like how they're all going to necessarily fit into this offense together. But I like Noah Thomas. I think they intentionally went out and wanted to get another big body wide receiver. So I'm going to take Noah Thomas at wide receiver for my first pass catcher position.
Really like that pick, and we'll have a conversation on Sunday on Dogs 24/7 about a guy that people are kind of sleeping on, not talking about enough. I think Noah Thomas needs to be in that conversation because, I think he tweaked his ankle at G-Day, didn't play a ton, and I think that sort of led to people not talking about him quite as much. I think Noah Thomas is going to be a big-time threat in this offense, and it's a situation where if there was ever a time to not really get caught up on who's starting games, I would point to this wide receiver combination because I think there's going to be several guys that, wind up sort of, I guess, being reserves, but I think we're going to see a lot of rotation at receiver, and I think Noah Thomas, again, led Texas A&M in receiving last season. I think he's poised to be very productive in 2025. All right, before we go to our break, I want to encourage everyone watching and listening, subscribe to dogs247.com. We have a 50% off sale going on in the month of June. I point out all the time, when you get these yearly subscriptions, if you time it right, it really works out and you get significant bang for your buck. You get all of Ben's recruiting intel as well as Kipp's on the 2026 class. You're going to be covered for the 2025 football season, the 2025-26 men's basketball season, Olivia Sayers baseball coverage for the spring. I can't encourage that enough. 50% off. Go to dogs247.com. Do not miss out on that sale. So we're going to take a quick break, come back, and finish off the second half of our roster draft. All right, Ben, you are back up to start the sixth round for us. Where are you going?
I'm a little indecisive about what to do here because, Kipp's obviously started to lock down the defensive line. I know that by making this pick that I'm about to make, I'm going to sacrifice. I've already sacrificed, not sacrificed the running back position. I'm actually getting the running back that I wanted to take. So I'm happy with that. But I'm going to be sacrificing another position because I know Kipp's going to take it with one of the two picks by the time it gets back to me. But I am going to stick at pass catcher. I'm going to take the first tight end off the board, and I'm going to take Oscar Delp. I know with our rules, you could technically not take a tight end, you could take 2 wide receivers. I don't care. Georgia runs too much 12 personnel to not have a tight end on your team as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm going to go with Oscar Delp. He had some big games down the stretch for Georgia last season. I think that there's other talented guys in that room, but I think for Georgia's offense to get back to where it was in 2021, 22, 23, it's going to need the tight end position to take a step up from where it was last season. And I think that Oscar Delp is the one that's primed to do that. And so I'm going to wrap up my pass catcher spots with Noah Thomas and Oscar Delp.
I'll say this, Ben, if Oscar was still on the board when my next pick came up, I was going to take him because I think he's going to play a big role. Think about the relationship he has with Gunnar Stockton, how close those two are. And then even going back to last November when it was still Carson Beck, I mean, I felt like the offense finally got clicking in that Tennessee game where he had multiple touchdowns, right, in that game. I mean, I think Oscar Delp is poised. And, going back to spring, I give Oscar a lot of credit. Like, he was very forthcoming of being like, I was kind of going through the motions to start last year, kind of thinking about the draft. And he kind of woke up midway through the year. And I think he's a guy that's motivated to make up for what he felt like was a disappointing 2024. I thought going with a tight end was the right call. And again, if Oscar was still there, I was gonna snag him in a couple picks. All right, Kipp, you're back up. Where are you going with your next pick?
I am going to take the last guy I think is going to be a starter on the offensive line, and that's Daniel Calhoun. He was again. I'm buying low because he was banged up in the spring, so we didn't really get the full chance to see him because of that foot injury. But I think he's going to run away with this right guard position, and Georgia needs a youth movement on its offensive line. Of course, they obviously don't have a choice, but just after seeing all of these guys get taken early in the draft and seeing the top 3 athleticism scores being Georgia offensive linemen, honestly, of all positions, it's got to leave a bad taste in everyone's mouth. The fan base, the coaching staff, like we never got to see what that offensive line was capable of. So turn the page and enter Daniel Calhoun, just a monster of an offensive lineman, a guy that I think when he comes into comes onto the field, I think he's going to make his presence known up front, and he's going to make probably life really great, not just for Gunnar Stockton, but for my other pick. I think he's going to make life great for Roderick Robinson between the tackles. I think he's just going to be a mauler. He shed a bunch of weight since he got to Georgia last spring. And he's got, with his size and feet, I just think right there, he's going to lock in and kind of give Georgia a breath of fresh air. Just a guy that can actually move defensive linemen and open up a lot of rushing lanes between the tackles.
I think that's a good pick, and I think he's one of those guys, again, because I think it was about halfway through spring practice that he got hurt. He's one of those guys when we get to fall camp, I think everybody's going to be paying attention to. They want to see if he's ready for this moment and if he can wind up, living up to the potential, because that offensive line room has a lot to prove and a lot to show after last season. And I really like that pick. I think Daniel Calhoun will have a good second year in the program. All right, I'm going defense with each of my next 2 picks. My first one, this was a guy I kind of struggled to figure out where I wanted him on my draft board. And I think it's in large part because of the depth of his position and what else is going on behind him, in this room, what I think is Georgia's deepest room. I'm going with Raylan Wilson. I think he's another guy that kind of comparing him to Noah Thomas, where I don't think people are talking about him a ton because of what Chris Cole did last year, because of what Justin Williams did during the spring. And I mean, Justin had a fantastic D-Day, but Raylan Wilson, I think, is primed and ready to have a very big junior season along with CJ Allen. I don't know if you guys had this sensation last season, but probably like last month, maybe month and a half, I really felt like Raylan Wilson turned a corner, and you could see him playing, reacting a lot quicker and reading plays and being able to make plays. I'm very high on Raylan Wilson. I think he's sort of that forgotten guy between him and CJ Allen. And again, those younger sophomores coming up. But I think Raylan Wilson is going to play really well. in his junior season, and I've got him as my inside linebacker on this team. All right, going to my next pick, again, sticking with defense. And this is a guy, if you could show me his stats for 2025, I feel like I would have a much better understanding of how good this defense was, and specifically how good this defensive line was. And my pick is Jordan Hall. This is a guy that's a former 5-star, a guy that dealt with injury. I mean, you think about how frustrating his 2024 season was. He's a guy that I think is motivated. And I think he's a guy that, I'm sure that he's had people write him off and people forget about him and say, well, his time's passed. He's not going to have this opportunity. I think he has a chance to be Georgia's starting nose tackle this season. And you think about what that means and the responsibility that is placed on you in that role. I really like Jordan Hall. I think he's got a chance. He's a guy that it's easy to root for. Ben, I think you were there the night that he did some interviews in the spring and was very candid about what he's been through. One, an easy guy to root for, but two, I think he will live up to the expectations and play a very big and very important role on this defense. All right, Kipp, back to you with your next pick.
I mean, there's only one direction I was ever going to go with this pick, and that's Quintavious Johnson. Georgia got Elo in the portal, but I still think Quintavious starts. I think the reason they went and got a guy like that, we all knew that the edge rusher position was so thin, but you saw in the spring game, Quintavious is banged up. You had 3 true freshmen out there in the field. Then they don't want that, as talented as those guys are. So Quintavious Johnson is the guy that all spring, even last year, the coaching staff's like, we got a steal here. I mean, we love this guy. Ben wrote article after article about Quintavious Johnson. Guys, I think Georgia really loves this guy, and the potential's off the charts. And I think he's going to show it. He is going to be the guy that plays a ton of snaps, and I think he's obviously scratching the surface of his potential. But I think he's going to kind of show everyone why the Georgia coaching staff was really excited to get him and why they got a steal in their own backyard. So I think he's going to be the guy that, when Georgia sends the same depth chart out every week, that doesn't change regardless of injury. I think he's going to be the guy that's listed as the number 1 outside linebacker. And I think he's going to play a ton of football for Georgia next season.
Hard for me to argue with that pick when you're also able to shade Georgia for their depth chart use. Ben, help us finish off this 7th round. Where are you going?
Yeah, I knew Quintavious Johnson wasn't getting back to me. I was grappling with taking him with the last pick just because I as Kipp said there, he's one of my favorite football players on this roster. I don't think that he gets talked about enough. And I think the fact that they took Elo Mendoza made people forget him even more, when that should certainly not be the case. They took Elo Mendoza because they wanted more numbers in that room, not because they didn't think that Quintavious Johnson was fully capable this season. So good pick, Kipp. Good pick. What I'm going to do here, you guys keep making this interesting for me. I thought one of you might simplify this for me. I'm going to just go ahead and take the guy that is going to be playing corner, I believe, opposite of Dalen Everett for most of this season, and that's Daniel Harris. He's had ups and downs during his time at Georgia, but I thought that he finished the season really, really strong. Really save for the, kind of boneheaded miscue in the Mississippi State game that allowed for that, 75, 80-yarder. He really didn't have a bad year. I think that was one mistake that sort of took up the lion's share of people's opinion on him. And I think that he overcame a lot of that. And so I think he'll be starting at corner. There are definitely corners behind him that are going to make that difficult for him to hold on to it. But there's a reason Georgia made as much of an effort as they did to make sure that he stayed on the roster for next season. So I'm sticking with Daniel Harris for my other DB position.
I like that pick a lot. And I think, I have to imagine Daniel Harris came into spring practice understanding, man, if I'm slacking, there's guys in Ellis Robinson, DeMello Jones pushing me for that position. So I think the fact he started, and I think he is in line to start, like Ben said, that speaks highly about his talent and also what the coaching staff thinks of him. All right, Ben, back to you to start the 8th round. Where are you going with this one?
I'm going on the defensive line for sure because I already know that you guys can't take another running back or outside linebacker. So those are going to be my last two picks. I'm going to go with a guy that we have basically not seen play football at Georgia yet, which basically all the picks remaining kind of fall into that category. But someone that if you're telling me 3 years from now this guy is a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, I would not be shocked. I'm not saying that he's going to be, but I would not be shocked. And that is Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. He dealt with a lot of injuries, or not really a lot of injuries, one significant injury last season that held him out throughout the year. This is a guy that is wired the way that you want your football players to be wired. He has freakish athleticism. It's a big, strong man. And, Georgia has had a lot of success. I had someone tell it to me this way. They've recruited a lot of Nigerian football players over the last couple of cycles. And I was told the verdict is still out on whether how high the hit rate is on the football players. Like, we still have to see that. But they know that the hit rate on the human beings that they've brought in among the Nigerian contingent is 100%, basically. Like, you talk about Nnamdi Agboko, Darren Akinigbon. You talk about, obviously, Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. They are all wired the way that Georgia wants their football players to be. And so I love Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. There's a little bit of a personal pick there just because I got to know him pretty well throughout his recruitment, and he was fantastic to be around. I think that he just has a great energy about him. I think that within 2 years, he is going to be a team leader, if not the team leader at Georgia. And so I'm glad to have him on my team as my first defensive lineman. Jordan.
It's just so rare that I make that mistake and mute myself. I just love to hear myself talk so much. The thing that I go back to with Joseph Jonah-Ajonye is that he was playing in that Clemson game, his very first game. Now, I think it was a little bit later in the game, and the game was well in hand, but that speaks to me what they saw of him as a true freshman. I think he played a little bit in some of the games that followed. Then he gets hurt. I think that was before the Texas game and winds up having surgery. So he's a guy that I think is going to get significant run in this defense, on this defensive line. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bill. Was he a 5-star coming out of high school? Maybe a fringe.
For sure. I can't remember in the 24/7 sports rankings whether he was or not, but I had someone that I trust very much from the state of Texas that scouts the state of Texas that told me they thought, and coming out of high school, that he was the future number 1 overall pick. If you're trying to find who the future number 1 overall pick is from Texas. Now, again, this is someone that's in Texas, scouts that state regularly. Like, that's how they felt about him as from a potential standpoint as a prospect. So we haven't gotten to see it, but I think that we're going to get to see it pretty early in Georgia's season.
All right, Kipp, where are you going with your next pick?
Well, I guess it's about time for me to get some help at DB. So I'm going to go with Ja'Cory Thomas. I think, all spring it was like, man, Georgia got all these, DBs out of the transfer portal. Like, let's go ahead and slide one of these guys in as the starter, right? And, I mean, all Ja'Cory did was just say, I'm not having it, guys. Sorry. I've put in the time here. And this is my job to win. And it showed. He had a great spring. I think he goes into the fall. I mean, Kirby's going to say at every single availability that, there's competition at every position, and you should have that. The best players should play. But I like Ja'Cory Thomas to lock down that strong safety position opposite KJ Bolden. I think that, he's kind of been a forgotten man just because Georgia had some Malachi Starks guy out there. Georgia had the insane run at DBs the last couple of years. But, I mean, we've seen guys come in and they're like 4th to 5th season and have really strong performances. I mean, I'm looking back just at Chris Smith as a guy that came in and earned his time around much higher rated guys and, was an All-American. I think Ja'Cory Thomas has all-conference potential. And with the guys around him, I think he's going to be positioned really well to make a lot of plays and to really be a team leader. Again, as that 4th-year guy who's, been on those, the championship teams, knows what it means. And there aren't a lot of those guys, still around that saw what it took from Georgia to win a national championship. But he's one of those guys. And I think he's going to just bring that leadership that Georgia needs right now in its locker room.
The reason I love that pick is because when you bring in 3 guys in the spring or in the winter transfer portal at your position and you go through the spring, it would have been very easy for Ja'Cory Thomas to want to look around after that spring transfer portal. And I think it says a lot about what he did this spring that didn't sound like it was ever even any type of consideration. I think he really did solidify his spot there.
Yeah, he has to be the favorite to be that starting safety, and they're going to keep pushing him, and they're going to give those guys another chance. But I really like that pick, and he is one of the guys to watch once the season starts, because if they can solidify that safety spot opposite KJ Bolden, I think the secondary is in a very good spot. All right, closing out, I believe this is the 8th round. I'm going to pick a guy that I kind of feel like I'm stopping his fall, and I think he's a guy that when this season is underway, we'll probably go, why was he on the board that long? Dillon Bell. Dillon Bell, a guy that, I don't think quite had the 2024 that most of us expected. I thought coming off of that Orange Bowl where he's making contested catches and he's making big plays, I was like, I think he's poised to be an all-SEC receiver in 2024, and he just didn't. That whole pass catching group just was really underwhelming. He struggled with drops just like the entire room did. But I think him coming back for another year, Georgia being interested in using him in different ways as a gadget player, sort of that Deebo Samuel running back wide receiver, I think that bodes well. And I think, again, I don't think you can count out a guy that is now a senior, a guy that, is in a wide receiver room that looks completely different than it did a year ago. But you consider he is one of those constants. I think he's poised to really be productive. And I think he'll be a go-to guy for Gunnar Stockton, who, again, when he starts in that Marshall game, that's only going to be his second career start. So I think you look to more experienced guys you can count on. And I think Dillon Bell's one of those guys. Going to my next pick, this was who I honestly thought that Ben was about to pick when he picked Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. Defensive line, I'm going with Elijah Griffin. I think Elijah is a guy that, the highest rated signee in Georgia's 2025 cycle. He's probably not going to start right away, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he's a guy that's going to provide you quality depth. I think when I think about when Georgia's defensive line has been at its best these last few years, it's when they've sort of had like those shifts in hockey where you can just run some guys off and run some other guys that are fresh on and can be just as productive. I think Elijah Griffin's going to play a big role in that. He's a guy that I think, 2-3 years from now will be an all-SEC player. I really like what his upside and what he brings to the table on the defensive line. So with my second defensive line pick, I'm going with Elijah Griffin. All right, Kipp, back to you. Where are you going with your next pick?
I love that Dillon Bell pick.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that's going to be a starter. You guys, I think, kind of split one wide receiver position with Noah Thomas and Colby Young, and Dillon's just hanging out there saying, they might need me at running back this year. So he's going to start at the flanker. He's been really productive. I think, he's been compared to Deebo a lot, and they're trying to get him the ball. And I think this is a year that they could probably, find some unique ways just because of all the talented pass catchers they have to get on the ball near the line of scrimmage. So I really love that pick. I was thinking about it, but I'm sticking at safety. Jonel Aguero, another guy that, again, people wondering, like, is this guy going to start at the star position? And I think it's clicked for him. The lights come on. You could tell he's playing faster. We all know he hits like a ton of bricks. And, when he tackles you feel it. He's one of those guys that ends up just, causing offensive playmakers to be, purple the next day. He's a bruise maker. And I just think that the fact that the defense is clicking for him, he understands his role in the scheme. It's allowed him. He doesn't have to think as much. He's getting to the ball quicker. And so I look at the transfers, and, if anyone has a chance, it's probably Adrian Maddox because of all the football he's played. But I don't see it. I think he's got Jonel's got a strong grip on the star. and he's really talented there at the position as well. So I just think, again, that position gets asked to do a lot for Georgia, almost sometimes to it's the detriment of the player. He's got to take one for the team and play assignment football, and that might not get you the playmaking stats you want, or it might put you out of position a lot. But I think with what the progress that Joe Nell's made, I really think that he's ready and primed for a breakout season. And I like him to shore up my 2 DB group, a strong group with him and Ja'Cory.
Can't go wrong going with very likely the starting star for Georgia this fall. All right, Ben, I want to ask you to just make the first of your 2 picks. And before we make your second one, I'm just going to give, going into the final 2 rounds, what positions we each need. So just go ahead and give me the first of your 2 picks.
Well, I already know who my last 3 players are going to be because you guys have sort of made some decisions for me at this point. And with my next 2, and I'll just do the first one first, but for my next 2, I'm going to go with the guys that I think should have been drafted higher than they're going to be going. And actually, I'm surprised. I when I was looking at the list after I made the Joseph Jonah-Ajonye pick, I was thinking Elijah Griffin. I was thinking Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. Now I'm realizing that Xavier McLeod is not off the board yet. And this is a guy that Georgia needs to be good this season. And, we saw flashes last season. I think he's going to have a next year jump. And so I'm taking Xavier McLeod, that interior defensive line. I think, Christian Miller obviously is really important there. Jordan Hall is really important there. But I would put Xavier McLeod right up in that conversation in terms of how badly Georgia needs him to perform this season. And another example of a guy that Georgia very intentionally went in the transfer portal with multiple years of eligibility remaining to go and be able to get him as a transfer at a position of need, but also still have plenty of time to see him develop throughout his Georgia career. And I think this is a year where we're going to see him really step up.
He's a guy that I felt like when he was on the field his first year at Georgia, he just flashed. And I think that he's got an opportunity. He'll be in the fight for a starting role, but even if he's not starting, he will make a big impact. All right, we're going into the final 2 rounds. Ben will have the first pick in this run, but just wanted to go and just list what positions each of us need going into the last 2 rounds. Ben still needs a running back and an outside linebacker. Kipp still needs a pass catcher and an inside linebacker. And I need an offensive lineman and a defensive back. So, Ben, let's kick off the final of these 2 rounds. Where are you going with your next pick?
I'm going to go with the running back that I wanted. I'll admit I was hoping, not that I don't think that Nate Frazier's a good pick, not that I don't think that Roger Robinson's a good pick, but I just think the value of Josh McCray is higher. This was another one. I brought up Cooper Patagna earlier. He really sold me on Josh McCray when we were talking about him, because when I had him on my show, I wasn't even going to ask him about Josh McCray. There was so much for us to talk about on the transfer side of things, and then just other recruiting related things. I wasn't going to ask about him. And Cooper brought him up when I was asking about something else, and it made me follow up and ask about him. And I'll admit, when Georgia took Josh McCray and I, saw his measurables similar to a Roderick Robinson type, I was thinking of him more as that short yardage, goal line bruiser type. And I definitely think Georgia is going to use him that way. But I think that I was underappreciating all of the various ways that Georgia might be able to use him. I think that he is going to be a much more feature part of Georgia's running game than I might have expected. We just saw Georgia come off of a year where they took a transfer portal running back, and he takes 1 year at Georgia and parlays it into rising his draft stock a little bit. So I think that Josh McCray, I would expect to see the same. And quite frankly, I don't think you can go wrong with a Brett Bielema running back. And if you heard anything that Brett Bielema said about Josh McCray after he transferred, that Georgia's getting a really good locker room guy, because Brett Bielema had nothing but amazing things to say about someone who was leaving his program, and that Brett Bielema even acknowledged he understood why he was making that decision to leave the program. And so I think Josh McCray is going to have a big year. And I think, for Georgia's running game to get back to where it needs to be, it needs to have that, great balance, that sort of bulkier, bounce off of tackles type of running back. And I think that's what Josh McCray is going to be.
He was a guy on my board. I had him number 6 overall, and obviously I took Nate Frazier, which took care of the running back position for me. But I really like Josh McCray, and nothing's going to be given to him, and he'll have to prove himself in fall camp. But I do like that pick, and I think he's got a chance to be very productive this fall for Georgia. All right, Kipp, where are you going with your next pick?
A lot of politicking going on for players left that there's no chance of anybody else taking. But that's okay. We're at that stage of the draft where we're saying, I thought these guys would have been there 5 rounds ago. That's fine. I'm going to take a guy that I think we all complained last season, like, why aren't they getting this guy the ball more? And that's Lawson Lucky. We're still waiting on the light to really fully come on for Oscar Delp. Not that he hasn't been a very good player. There's just, when you're a tight end at Georgia, there is a high expectation. But I think if you're looking at someone who has the skill set closest to Brock Bowers, a guy that you don't have to worry about the ball's near him, he's going to make tough catches and he's going to get open, it's Lawson Lucky. And so I think if I'm looking at the projections now and then looking at the end of the season, I'm not going to be shocked whatsoever if Lucky's in the top 3 as far as receiving yards. I just think he is the yardage guy. He gets separation, he gets chunk plays, and I think he's going to challenge for the most yards. So I think there's a chance. At the end of the day, I have the top 2 receiving yards guys for Georgia this year with Branch breaking 1,000, and let's say Lucky's in the mid to high 700s. I just think he's a guy with his route running and athleticism. He's an outstanding playmaker, and like you guys said, Georgia's got 2 tight ends out there enough to where he's basically a co-starter. So I like getting him at this point. I can't believe he was still on the board.
I mean, could you imagine covering Georgia and not having a tight end on your team? I mean, for a school that values the tight end position as much as they do, I couldn't imagine it myself, Kipp.
You'd have to be a complete dumbass to do something like that. I can't figure out who would want to do that. No, I was going to say, truthfully, on Kipp's part, I was looking at my board. I've kind of been updating it as we've been going, and I was like, are we really about to watch Lawson Lucky go undrafted? So got to give credit to Kipp there, even if I did not draft a tight end. I will tip my cap, even if it makes me look stupid. All right, so this is the first of my final 2 picks, and I'm going to go defensive back, and I'm going to go with who I think is the best poised to unseat Ja'Cory Thomas, and the one guy that I think could make this really interesting, and it's Zion Branch. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I thought going into Georgia landing Zachariah and Zion, I didn't put much stock in Zion. I just thought, he's coming with his brother. That's good experience. But, you saw him out there in spring practice. I mean, this is a big safety, and this is a guy that's willing to hit. I thought he struggled some in coverage at USC, but I think having an entire offseason at Georgia, he's a guy that I think will be a contributor in some form or fashion in this secondary. Again, I would say right now I don't expect him to start, but I really like the addition of Zion Branch, a guy that, again, very easy to be overshadowed by your brother with what he does on offense and what he's capable of doing in this Georgia offense. But I got Zion Branch as my second defensive back, and I would just tell people don't forget about him. I think he'll be productive this season.
If for nothing else, that's a smart pick because enough people will read your team and see Zion Branch and think that you took Zachariah Branch and you're just going to steal some Zachariah Branch picks. So that was a great move.
I am always trying to cover my bases.
Diabolical.
All right, last pick. I need an offensive lineman. I'm going to go with who I think is going to be the swing tackle for this team, a guy that I think, even though he probably won't be starting, will still play quite a bit, and that's Bo Hughley. I think Bo deserves a lot of credit. I'd kind of compare it to what we were talking about with Ja'Cory Thomas, where he's bided his time. He probably could have transferred and went and played somewhere else, but he's waited his turn. I was impressed with him as a leader last year. Go back to that Florida game after Nate Frazier scores and gets the penalty, and Kirby gives him an earful. One of the first guys over there talking to Nate, trying to just sort of either calm him down or just kind of tell him, what's what, was Bo Hughley. So I think that speaks very highly of Bo Hughley. I think he's going to be a guy that plays quite a bit, even if he is not a starter. And I think he's a guy, when you look to 2026 especially, I think he will be a starter on this team. I am finishing my draft, my 11th and final pick, going with Bo Hughley.
You know, I can't believe Juan Gaston's about to go undrafted. I'll be honest with you. I think that he's someone that has a real chance to play. And then I will also say the fact that Kipp's about to get this guy in the last round is unbelievable to me.
Yeah, I saw how this was falling, and I was like, man, this is diabolical. But
I moved him to the bottom, and I was like, don't have to worry about it now. And how can you not believe it? We had to talk you into taking Juan Gaston in the spring draft.
I've heard more. I've gotten more info through spring practices. I feel stronger about him than I did at the beginning of spring.
He's seen the light. He's seen the light, Kipp.
That's right. I can see.
Yeah, that's earlier. Guys from the state of Texas who guys who could be number 1 overall draft picks, things like that. I mean, if there's a guy on this roster who I feel the most comfortable saying this guy's got first round talent, it's Chris Cole. I mean, it's just we can't stop talking about him. And I remember 2 years ago, me and Jordan were texting, and I was like, ESPN got it wrong. They had Raylan Wilson on the all freshman team instead of CJ Allen. And we couldn't believe it because, CJ had started multiple games and was racked up a ton of tackles. And now I'm sitting here, we're really at a point where you think Raylan Wilson's going to be the starter. He's the likely starter. But every time you see Chris Cole, you're like, I don't know, man. I can't even believe we're having the conversation that Raylan Wilson might not be a starter. And I know Glenn Schumann will say, listen, guys, it's just like tight end. We just rotate these guys enough, or wide receiver. They're all starters, just like Channing Tindall. Didn't start but had so many plays. But, I mean, that's just where Chris Cole is. He's just such a big part of the future this season and next season. It's just his stage. And you just saw what Jalen Walker did. They finally unlocked his skill set. And in walks a guy that may be more Jalen Walker than Jalen Walker. And so I just think that getting Chris Cole the last pick, you're right. It is diabolical. I can't keep getting away with this, but yet here I am getting away with it. And I love getting Chris Cole as my last pick in the draft.
Ben, I want to see if you had the same thought I did when Kipp started talking about Texas. I was like, he's really about to take Justin Williams over Chris Cole.
I thought that for a second. I was like, there's no way this is about to happen.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, Kipp. I was considering taking Chris Cole with my first pick. I knew that I wanted to go heavy on defense, and I was, I feel strongly about CJ Allen being, the face and the brain of the defense this year. But I feel that strongly about Chris Cole. The fact that a guy that I was truly considering with 1-3 dropping to the 11th round, I can't believe that. I don't want to say that won you the draft, but I think it probably won you the draft.
All right, Ben, Mr. Irrelevant, the 33rd and final pick in this draft. It's going to be an outside linebacker. Who is it going to be? My choices are between Chris Jones, Isaiah Gibson, Darren Eckenigban, and Chase Linton. So it's going to be one of players that we have not seen play any real snaps at Georgia. I'm going with a talent pick on this one, and I'm going with Isaiah Gibson. I will say this. I think that Chase Linton had an awesome spring, and I have heard nothing but unbelievable things about Chase Linton this spring. To think that his path to playing time is sooner than I would have anticipated it when he was getting recruited. But when we're talking about 5-star elite talent coming off of the edge, that's what Isaiah Gibson is. And I think even with taking Elo Mendoza out of the portal, even with Quintavious Johnson being someone that's, set to be a top performer for Georgia this season, I still think there's going to be snaps for Isaiah Gibson at points this season. And so I don't know what type of player he's going to be as a freshman, but I do know if you were just lining up Georgia's edge rushers, outside linebackers, and saying, which one looks like the first round pick, Isaiah Gibson has that look to him. And so I am going on talent and potential alone in taking Isaiah Gibson with Mr. Irrelevant. I'd say you'd be sitting Pretty. If that was your very last pick, I like Isaiah Gibson and I like his upside going forward. All right, we're going to look at each of our three teams and discuss really quickly our thoughts before we end this episode. So I had the first overall pick and then the fourth pick as it came back, or actually, no, the sixth pick as it came back. So I had running back Nate Frazier, defensive back Dalen Everett, outside linebacker Elo Madozi, pass catcher Colby Young, offensive lineman Michael Morris, inside linebacker Raylan Wilson, defensive lineman Jordan Hall, pass catcher Dylan Bell, defensive lineman Elijah Griffin, defensive back Zion Branch, offensive lineman Bo Hewley. I'm pretty happy with the team I got. I thought I did a pretty good job of passing and spreading around the different positions. And I didn't really hit one position in back-to-back picks. If I could do one thing over, I think I would have grabbed another defensive back a little earlier. Probably looked at like Janelle Aguero, who I think Kipp wound up with, but pretty happy with my team. And I don't know that I said it at the time, but Dalen Everett was one of the guys I was considering with the first pick. So to get him with the sixth pick, felt really good about that. Pretty happy with how my team played out. All right, Kipp had pass catcher Zachariah Branch, running back Roderick Robinson, defensive lineman Christian Miller, offensive lineman Drew Bobo, defensive lineman Gabe Harris, offensive lineman Daniel Calhoun, outside linebacker Quintavious Johnson, defensive back Ja'Cory Thomas, defensive back Jonell Aguero, pass catcher Lawson Lucky, and inside linebacker Chris Cole. Kipp, what do you think about how your team came together?
I think from top to bottom, I got guys that in my eyes, if not starting, going to be playing a huge role for Georgia. So I feel pretty good about that. I know I took maybe Roderick Robinson a little early, but I also am projecting, again, that he's healthy in camp. And if he is, his role is going to be as big as anyone's in that backfield. Even coming off of Nate Frazier's, outstanding freshman season, they are going to need Roderick Robinson to have, over 100 carries, over 100 touches to be successful in offense, in my opinion. So that's a projection by me. And you know what? It didn't really cost me in my eyes taking them that early because I was able to, like I said, get starters really from beginning to end. And I love the upside that I have with guys like Quintavious Johnson and obviously Chris Cole at the end. But I think that getting the overall top playmaker on offense, in my opinion, and Zachariah Branch and their best chances at an offensive All-American, a guy that's already been an All-American. Like I said, I feel pretty good about the draft from start to finish.
Yeah, I thought that Kipp, the Roderick Robinson pick was kind of iffy, but then, I mean, I'm going to be honest, Ben, I think he kicked our ass in the last 2 or 3 rounds. He did a very good job of stacking the positions because by the end, I mean, we did a pretty poor job of we just set this up for Kipp. He did a great job to finish the draft.
I don't think I did a poor job, but that's okay. I love my team, but I do think Chris Cole in the 11th round is a miscarriage of justice.
All right, let's talk about that team that Ben loves so much. He had the third and then the fourth pick to start this thing. Inside linebacker CJ Allen, defensive back KJ Bolden, offensive lineman Monroe Freeling, offensive lineman Ernest Green, pass catcher Noah Thomas, pass catcher Oscar Delp, defensive back Daniel Harris, defensive lineman Joseph Jonah Ajanye, defensive lineman Xavier McLeod, running back Josh McCray, and outside linebacker Isaiah Gibson. So what do you think, Ben? How did your team come together?
Well, I'll say this. I believe that I got Georgia's 2 starting tackles. I believe that I got the signal caller of the defense. I think that KJ Bolden is arguably the most important player on the team this season just because of some unknowns at defensive back. I think that my team from a voting standpoint will come down to what people expect from Noah Thomas versus not. Like if you think that Georgia went and got Noah Thomas and that he's going to be pushing to be an 800-yard guy this season, then I think that people are going to really, really like my team. Otherwise, I think that because I basically sacrificed the outside linebacker position with a couple of the decisions that I made, we'll see. But I like my team a lot. I think I've got team leaders across the board. They had their leadership summit a couple of weeks ago, and other than Isaiah Gibson, I think every single player on my team was at that leadership summit.
Can't argue with that. Can't argue with that.
I like
logic.
the Xavier McLeod pick too. I think that's a sneaky good pick to get a guy that people aren't talking about enough. Georgia really likes, and as long as he's locked in, should play a big role for Georgia's defensive front. So I like where you got him late in the draft.
And that one fell to me because I was honestly considering taking Elijah Griffin, and then when Jordan took that, it kind of made the decision for me. So I felt good about getting that one where I got him.
I'm nothing but a gibber, if you can believe it. I always look out for my fellow podcasters. Anyone that went undrafted that we felt should have been picked, I would just shout out. Ben mentioned earlier Juan Gaston. That's a good one. Bo Walker. I figured for sure Bo would be picked by somebody. Anyone else that went undrafted that you guys want to shout out?
Bo Walker for sure. I mean, probably, honestly, one of the other tight ends, Jordan, you should have taken a tight end. I mean, Jaden Riddell, doesn't matter to me who it would have been, but I mean, the only 2 tight ends getting taken in a draft where there were 3 teams is, that one didn't sit right with me. And then the freshman receivers, I think I thought that there was a chance, but again, when Kipp and I both took tight ends, I guess it was going to limit the number of receivers that ended up getting drafted. So
I stand by my receiver picks, and I will not let you guys bully me to change who I am. I feel great about it, and I hope the voters will too. Go to Twitter. We will have a poll up later on Tuesday afternoon to vote on who you think has the best team. We will also do that on Dogs 24/7. We'll get ready to wrap up this episode. Ben, before we do, I think we're going to do a Stay Wolk this week. Anything you want to preview with that podcast?
I mean, I expect to be talking about some news. I'll say that. So we're probably going to maybe record later than we normally do because we're expecting a big decision in the Georgia world on Wednesday, June 18th. I guess my dates are getting mixed up there, but we'll be previewing the last official visit weekend, which is going to be much smaller in numbers than the previous official visit weekend, and then we will have an interview with 2027 wide receiver commit Gavin Honore, which we learned the pronunciation of that during that interview as well. So looking forward to giving people a chance to meet the first member of Georgia's 2027 recruiting class.
Hope you guys will tune in for that episode. It'll be a fun one for sure. We will wrap up the episode right there. I want to make sure and remind you all to subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We have a 50% off sale right now. Do it so you stay up to date on recruiting, team coverage, getting ready for men's basketball season later. And like I said, you sign up now, you'll be set up for baseball coverage as well. Go subscribe to our YouTube, subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please rate and review. That helps us so much. Go to our YouTube, Dogs 24/7. Go to our TikTok. A lot of good content there. As we're about a month away from SEC Media Days, and that's really when things get going. Hey, before we get out of here, shout out Nick Chubb signing with the Houston Texans. And Georgia women's track and field winning the national title. I want to make sure and say that before we ended the episode. But we will end it right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.